Hi, is it on?
Yep.
Okay, Sam Matier, 8515 West 57th Street. I wanted to talk about a couple things. One is kind of the form of some of the policies, how they're being written. And I think there's some room for improvement. I've noticed on the policy that have to do with the, well, a couple things. One is policy 121 that just came up last time, and it has to do with how money is spent, the ability to spend money in different ways, or to invest it, to invest our funds, and we're going to get a lot of money out of the bonds, and it needs to be placed somewhere. And I noticed one thing I did like is it had a deadline on when the policy was changed, when it ended, and I think that's a good thing. But what I didn't see was, is there going to be a new policy written, or is it going to be some, just the document that is posted there? And I think what I've been used to seeing from this council is that when new policies are written, the old policy is redlined, and we know what we've got. But if you don't rewrite the policy, then things can be forgotten. And I think it's a little sloppy going in that direction. And that's also happened in the past when we increased the ability of the city manager to spend from $30,000 on up to $100,000 without city council approval. And again, it was written by a memorandum, and there's no deadline on it. I mean, you would think, well, when the community center is built, then that's a deadline. But there still needs to be something definite. And I've heard from some council members that, well, we're going to watch it, we're going to make sure it's okay. And I'm sure you will, and I'm sure our city manager will do a good job, but he's doing an awful good job, and he might be hired away by somebody else, and then we've got somebody else coming in here that you got to watch. It may not have his reputation. So I think we need to do a little bit better job.
Can I ask you for clarification on the first policy that you were referring to, not the one regarding the community center, but can you be more specific on which policy you were talking about?
Okay, the first policy is 121 that has to do with how we can invest the funds.
Okay.
I think we raised the limit so we can go up to 50% in a certain kind of fund. I don't remember which kind it was.
Okay.
And that's, I'm not objecting to that, and I'm not objecting to raising the limits for the city manager and the other people, but at least it ought to be documented well. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was the process. In our legislative process, we have the city council involved, we have staff involved, we have committees involved, and I question the communication that goes between these various groups. Because one thing that disturbs me is that council members are discouraged from going to committee meetings. And council members have a lot of information, and they gather a lot of information from the public, and they don't have a way to get that to the committee. And that knowledge should be taken advantage of.
What committees are you talking about?
Well, in this case, I'm talking about the Planning Commission.
Oh.
And there's a specific policy that's coming about that has to do with home-based businesses. And I know that I've talked to some of the council members, and they have some opinions on what should be done. And they have talked to staff. And I've sat through the Planning Commission, and I'm not seeing what is given to staff arriving at the Planning Commission. And what I'm seeing is the opinions of staff, and I think we have to have a better way of getting this message through. And I'm not even talking about, I've got some opinions on home-based businesses, but it's not the time to do it now. But I do think that the city needs to look at how this process works. How do you get information from you, the council members, through the staff, or to the council, or to the Planning Commission, or should you go directly? And I think we're deficient in that area. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Just a couple comments about that. I think clarification is the first issue. Has to do with the policy change, and the way the council has worked in the past. That policy remains in effect until it's changed. There is no date on it. Most policies are enacted and they are in place as part of our operations until another policy comes about to change it. Is that the understanding generally? And then on the policy regarding the community center expenditures, how much the city administrator can approve, it's true the amounts were increased, but that authority and that policy dies once the community center is built, because it's only specific to that project that he's given those spending limitations. Once the building's built and the project is accepted, then the policy dies because it only applies to that specific building and construction project. And I think everybody understands that here on the council. So we would not have any reason to raise his limits and spending authority because they were perfectly fine the way they were. However, we're not used to dealing with $30 million construction projects that may require change orders far exceeding what the normal amounts were. That's why he was given temporary authority, and everybody understood that would end this at the time the building was completed. And then I won't comment too much about planning commission versus council. There are very specific legal reasons why it becomes problematic for council members to interact with the planning commission, because many of the items that they are involved with could come to the council, and if a council member was too involved in the planning commission process, they would not be able to render a judgment or decisions as a council member, because there would be a conflict of interest. They would have to recuse themselves. So there are some pretty technical reasons why we discourage people. Now, we can't tell our council people not to go to committee meetings, commission meetings. They're perfectly free to do so, but by doing so, they may put themselves in a position that if they would want to vote on something later on and can't, because it would be considered a legal conflict of interest, which would put the city in a very serious situation. So it's complicated business sometimes. That's probably one of the most complicated issues, because it's one of the few times that the city council is in a quasi-judicial category, and so therefore we have to be very careful how we proceed. I just want to bring that up for general purposes, just so that the audience would understand that kind of where we're at on that. Anyone else wish to come forward for public comments? This time would be the time for you to do so.